Little black girl saw everyone ignore the billionaire's deaf daughter until she spoke to her in sign language. You need to stay invisible here. These people don't like to be bothered by people like you. The cutting words of the event. Coordinator echoed in Kesha Williams's mind as she discreetly adjusted her black blazer in the bathroom mirror at the Metropolitan Hotel. At 24, Kesha knew exactly what people like you meant in that environment. Black, young, and clearly outside the circle of Chicago's elite who gathered in the main hall for the Pierce Foundation Charity Gala. As a freelance sign language interpreter, she was only there for a job that would pay her overdue bills, nothing more. But something about that night would be different. Very different. Upon returning to the gilded hall, Kesha immediately noticed the stark contrast. Hundreds of people in formal attire chatted animatedly, champagne glasses clinking, laughter echoing off the marble walls. At the center of attention, tech billionaire Harrison Pierce posed for photos with politicians and celebrities, his perfect smile shining under the flashbulbs. That's when Kesha saw her. A teenager of about 17 wearing an elegant navy blue dress stood completely alone next to an ornate column. While everyone around her gestured and talked animatedly, she remained motionless, her intelligent eyes watching the lips of the people around her with a concentration that Kesha recognized instantly. The girl was deaf, and she was being completely ignored by everyone. Kesha watched for several minutes, feeling a familiar anger grow in her chest. Several people passed by the teenager, some even greeting her with polite nods, but no one attempted to truly engage her in conversation. No one made any effort to include her in the party that was clearly celebrating her own father's achievements. Interesting, isn't it? A male voice interrupted her thoughts. Kesha turned to find an older, well-dressed man with a condescending smile. Our host's daughter. Poor Harrison. It must be difficult to deal with a situation like this in public. A situation? Kesha repeated, keeping her voice controlled. Well, you know, the man lowered his voice conspiratorially. A disabled daughter. Of course, he loves her. But I imagine it's complicated for a businessman like him to constantly have to explain why she can't participate normally in conversations. Kesha felt her hands clench into fists. And you think that's her fault? The man seemed surprised by the direct question. No, of course it's no one's fault. It's just that, he shrugged. Some people are born different. That's life. At that moment, Kesha made a decision that would change everything. Ignoring the protocol that told her to remain discreet, she walked directly up to the lonely teenager. Hi, Kesha signed in ASL, her hands forming the greeting with natural fluidity. I'm Kesha. What's your name? The girl's eyes widened in pure surprise, then lit up with genuine joy that made Kesha's heart ache. How long had this girl been waiting for someone to simply talk to her? Isabella, she signed back, her movements elegant and quick. You speak ASL. How long have you? I work as an interpreter, Kesha replied, smiling. But tonight I'm just here watching rich people pretend to care about charity. Isabella laughed quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. Did you really say that? I did, and I have plenty more sarcastic observations about this party if you want to hear them. As they talked, Kesha noticed how Isabella transformed. The mask of politeness disappeared, replaced by a vibrant, intelligent, and surprisingly funny personality. The girl had sharp opinions on everything from the hotel's overly gilded decor to the guests' empty conversations. You know what's funny? Isabella signaled, gesturing subtly toward her father. My dad donated $3 million today to special education programs. $3 million, and he never learned a single word in sign language to talk to me. The irony was so absurd it was cruel. Kesha watched Harrison Pierce working the crowd with rehearsed charm, speaking eloquently about giving voice to those who cannot speak and building bridges of communication, all while his own daughter remained silent and alone, less than 10 feet away. He always does this, Isabella continued, her hands moving with restrained bitterness. Public events, photos, speeches about inclusion. Then we come home and he communicates with me through the housekeeper who translates everything. Kesha felt something boil up inside her. It wasn't just anger. It was recognition. She knew all too well the feeling of being underestimated, ignored, treated as if she were invisible by people who thought themselves superior. But unlike Isabella, Kesha had learned to fight back. "Isabella," she signaled carefully, "would you like me to talk to your father?" The girl's eyes widened in panic. No, he would be furious. "He doesn't like it when strangers get involved in our family affairs." Kesha smiled, and there was something about that smile that made Isabella realize she was dealing with someone completely different from anyone she had ever met. "Sweetheart," Kesha signaled with quiet confidence, "let me worry about your father's anger. Some conversations need to happen, even if powerful people don't want to have them." While Harrison Pierce continued his show for the donors, completely oblivious to his daughter, who remained invisible at her own party, something was brewing in that quiet conversation between two women the world had taught him to underestimate. If you've ever felt invisible in places where you should belong, don't miss this incredible story. Subscribe to the channel because what happens when Kesha decides to confront one of the most powerful men in Chicago will completely surprise you. The opportunity came sooner than Kesha expected. During the keynote speech, Harrison Pierce took the stage with his political campaign smile, adjusting the microphone with the confidence of someone who has never been questioned about anything. "Today, we celebrate not only our generosity, but our commitment to inclusion," his voice echoed through the gilded hall. $3 million earmarked for programs that will give voice to those who cannot speak, that will build bridges where once there was only silence. Kesha watched Isabella flinch slightly at those words. The hypocrisy was so blatant it was obscene. When Pierce stepped off the stage, surrounded by his usual group of sycophants, Kesha made a decision that would set the course for everything. Ignoring the disapproving glances of the security guards, she walked straight up to him. "Mr. Pierce," she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear, "may I have a word?" Pierce turned, clearly irritated by the interruption. His eyes quickly scanned Kesha from head to toe. Young, black, obviously not part of his social circle. "And you are?" he asked with that tone rich people use when they want you to remember your place. "Kesha Williams. I'm a sign language interpreter." She kept her voice firm and professional. "I just met your daughter, Isabella, and I'd like to talk about—" "What exactly?" Pierce interrupted her, his public smile now replaced by a cold mask of impatience. "About the fact that while you talk about giving a voice to those who cannot speak, your own daughter has been sitting there alone for 2 hours, with no one trying to talk to her." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group around them. Some people stopped their conversations to watch the unusual situation unfold. Pierce laughed, a harsh, condescending sound. "Miss Williams, was it? I don't think you understand how these things work. Isabella is perfectly fine. She's used to social events." "Used to being ignored, you mean?" Pierce's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Watch your tone, girl. You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Kesha replied, her voice gaining an intensity that made some of those present recoil slightly. "I'm talking to a man who donated $3 million to special education today, but never bothered to learn a single word of sign language to communicate with his own daughter." The explosion came immediately. "Who the hell do you think you are to come here and lecture me? You don't know anything about my life or my family." "I know Isabella lost her hearing when she was 7, Kesha continued calmly, even as Pierce visibly reddened. "I know she feels invisible in her own home, and I know you talk about her as if she were an inconvenience to be managed." "Enough!" Pierce growled, gesturing to the security guards. "I want this woman out of here now." But Kesha didn't back down. "Do you know why I know all this, Mr. Pierce? Because my younger sister is also deaf, and I've seen what happens to deaf children when their own parents decide it's easier to hire other people to communicate with them than to learn how to do it themselves." Something in her voice made Pierce hesitate, and the security guards stopped in their tracks. "My sister Jade was 8 when our parents died in a car accident. I was 16. You know what I did? I learned sign language. I studied. I worked. I fought. I did everything I could so she would never feel alone or invisible. Because that's what people who truly love do. They adapt." Pierce was shaking with rage now. You're out of line. Completely out of line. What's out? Of line, Kesha retorted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Is a man who can speak fluently about inclusion to 200 people but can't say "I love you" to his own daughter in her language. The crowd around them was clearly uncomfortable now. Whispers began to circulate, people exchanging meaningful glances. Pierce realized he was losing control of the situation in public. "Security!" he shouted. "Remove this woman immediately!" But when the security guards approached, something unexpected happened. Isabella appeared, positioning herself between them and Kesha. "No," she said loudly, her pronunciation slightly altered by deafness, but perfectly understandable. "She is my guest." Pierce was visibly shocked to hear his daughter speak in public, something that rarely happened due to her insecurity about her own voice. "Isabella, come back to—" he began. "No, Dad," Isabella interrupted him, her eyes shining with a determination that Kesha recognized as familiar. "For the first time in years, someone actually saw me. Someone cared enough to really talk to me. And you want to kick her out?" Pierce's embarrassment was palpable. Now dozens of important guests were witnessing his own daughter defending a stranger against him. "We'll discuss this at home," he said through clenched teeth, clearly trying to end the scene. "No, we never discuss anything," Isabella replied, each word laden with years of pent-up frustration. "You speak through other people. You make decisions about my life without consulting me. You donate millions to children like me, but you can't spend 5 minutes with me." Kesha watched Pierce struggle to maintain his composure in front of so many important people. She could see that he was calculating, trying to find a way out that would save his reputation. "Very well," he finally said, forcing a political smile. "Miss Williams, since you are so passionate about this subject, how about we put your expertise to work? You are hired as Isabella's personal interpreter. We can discuss the details tomorrow." The crowd murmured their approval, clearly relieved by the seemingly elegant resolution of the conflict. But Kesha saw through the ploy. Pierce wasn't being generous. He was trying to control her, bring her into his circle where he could monitor and limit her influence. "What an interesting offer," Kesha replied slowly, a smile playing on her lips. "But I have a counter-proposal." Pierce raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting resistance to his generous offer. "How about you learn ASL? For real, not just a few words for publicity photos. 6 months of intensive lessons with me. If at the end of that period you can have a real 30-minute conversation with Isabella without interpreters, I'll work for you for free for the rest of the year." "And if I don't?" Pierce asked, his voice laden with skepticism. Kesha smiled, and there was something in that smile that made some of those present realize they were about to witness something far beyond a simple bet. "If you don't, you make an additional donation of $5 million to sign language education programs in Chicago public schools, and you publicly admit that you failed as a father by not learning to communicate with your own daughter." An absolute silence fell over the group. Pierce was clearly stuck. Refusing would seem to admit that he didn't really care enough about his daughter to make this effort. Accepting would mean risking monumental public humiliation. "You're bluffing," he finally said. "That's impossible. 6 months isn't enough time to master a completely new language." "For most people, maybe," Kesha agreed. "But you're Harrison Pierce, right? The man who built a tech empire from scratch, who speaks 4 languages, who has never backed down from a challenge. Surely learning to converse with your own daughter can't be harder than closing billion-dollar deals?" The trap was set perfectly. Pierce couldn't back down without looking like a coward and a negligent father in front of all those influential guests. "All right," he said finally, extending his hand. 6 months. But when I win this ridiculous bet, you're going to work for me, and you're going to learn to keep your mouth shut about matters that are none of your business." Kesha shook his hand, feeling the anger and contempt emanating from him. "Deal?" "But Mr. Pierce, there's one thing you still don't understand about me." "And what would that be?" "I never make bets I'm not sure I'll win." As the crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their conversations and drinks, Kesha watched Pierce walk away, clearly furious but trying to keep up appearances. Isabella remained by her side, her eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Do you really think you can teach him?" Isabella signaled discreetly. Kesha smiled, but her eyes revealed something the teenager couldn't quite decipher. A confidence that went far beyond bravado, as if she knew something about the situation that no one else suspected. What Isabella didn't know, what Pierce couldn't imagine, and what none of the guests at that elegant evening could have predicted, was that Kesha Williams had done much more thorough research on Harrison Pierce before accepting that job. And what she had discovered about his past, about the real reasons behind his emotional neglect of Isabella, would turn that seemingly simple bet into something much more dangerous, both for him and for the entire empire he had carefully built around his immaculate public image. Every arrogant word, every condescending gesture, every moment of contempt Pierce displayed was being carefully cataloged by someone who understood perfectly how to use a person's own weaknesses against them. And Harrison Pierce had just handed all his weaknesses on a silver platter to exactly the wrong person. The following Monday, Kesha arrived at the Pierce mansion carrying a brown leather briefcase and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The housekeeper led her to the library where Harrison Pierce was waiting behind an imposing desk, clearly trying to establish a power dynamic from the outset. "Miss Williams," he said without looking up from the documents he was pretending to read. "I hope you brought a more impressive resume than your performance last week." "Actually, Mr. Pierce, I brought something much more interesting." Kesha opened the briefcase and removed a series of organized documents. "My proposed study schedule. 6 months, 2 classes per week. Structured progression." Pierce finally looked at her, his eyes flashing with disdain. "You really think you can teach me anything? I speak Mandarin, French, German, and Italian. I built a billion-dollar company talking to presidents and CEOs, and you think your little hand language is going to be a challenge?" The condescension in his voice was so thick you could almost cut it. Kesha kept her expression neutral, but inside she smiled. Every arrogant word was being carefully filed away. "Hand language," she repeated calmly. "Interesting. Is that what you call your daughter's means of communication?" Pierce leaned back in his chair. "Don't try to lecture me, kid. Isabella has the best schools, the best tutors, everything money can buy. If she chooses to isolate herself, that's not my fault." "Chooses to isolate herself?" Kesha murmured, making a note in her notebook. "I'll remember that phrase." Over the next 2 hours, Pierce demonstrated exactly why he had failed so spectacularly to connect with his daughter. Impatient, condescending, and completely convinced of his own superiority, he treated each exercise as if he were wasting his time on something irrelevant. "This is ridiculous," he exploded when Kesha tried to teach him the basic sign for sorry. "Why can't I just say the words?" "She can read lips." "Because lip reading captures only 30% of actual communication," Kesha explained patiently. "And because your daughter has spent years watching you talk about her to other people, never with her. I pay professional interpreters. It's more efficient." "Efficient?" Kesha repeated, making another note. "Is that the word that comes to mind when you think about your relationship with Isabella?" "Efficiency?" Pierce stood up abruptly. "That's enough for today. You have 5 months and 3 weeks to teach me this language. I suggest you be more productive in the next sessions." After he left the library, Kesha remained seated, quietly organizing her materials. It was then that Isabella appeared at the door, hesitant. "How did it go?" she signaled. "Exactly as I expected," Kesha replied. "Your father is even more arrogant than he appeared at the party." Isabella approached, her eyes full of curiosity and concern. "Do you really think you can teach him?" Kesha smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Isabella realize she was missing an important part of the conversation. "Isabella, can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure." "Has your father ever said anything cruel specifically about your deafness? Something that hurt you deeply?" Isabella's eyes suddenly filled with tears. "Why?" "Because I need to understand exactly what kind of man I'm dealing with." Isabella hesitated, then began to sign slowly. "When I was 12, he was entertaining Japanese investors at home. I went downstairs for dinner and tried to greet them. My voice, you know how difficult it is to modulate your tone when you can't hear yourself. Kesha nodded, encouraging her to continue. After they left, he called me into his office. He said I had embarrassed our family, that my voice scared important people, that it was better for me to stay in my room when we had visitors. The anger Kesha felt was so intense that she had to take a deep breath to control it. He said that exactly like that? Worse. He said my mother would have been ashamed of what I had become. Kesha closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was something different in them. A cold determination that made Isabella flinch slightly. Isabella, I need you to trust me completely. I can guarantee that at the end of these 6 months, your father will understand exactly what it means to look down on someone. You have a plan, don't you? I have several plans, Kesha replied, her expression softening as she saw the hope in the girl's eyes. But first, I need you to tell me everything about your father's company, especially how he treats his employees. That night, Kesha drove to a small cafe in downtown Chicago, where a middle-aged man with gray hair and a serious expression was waiting for her. David Chun, a former investigative journalist and current lawyer specializing in workplace discrimination cases. So you got access, David said when she sat down at the reserved table in the corner. Better than that. I got 6 months of free access and his ego working in my favor. Kesha slid a folder across the table. Everything I've collected so far on Harrison Pierce and his business practices? David opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the documents. Where did you get this? Public records, interviews with former employees, a few well-placed acquaintances? Kesha smiled. Do you remember Jade? My sister, the one who works in the Human Resources Department at Pierce Innovations? The very same. Turns out that 5 years of quietly recording every instance of discrimination, every prejudiced comment, every questionable decision can build up a pretty interesting file. David whistled softly. Kesha, this is explosive. If half of this is verifiable, it's all verifiable. Emails, audio recordings of meetings, documented testimonials. Harrison Pierce spent years building an empire based on the exploitation and systematic discrimination of Black, Latino, and disabled employees. And the plan is? Kesha leaned forward, her voice low but intense. He thinks he's hiring me to teach sign language. In reality, he's giving me direct access to his home, his family, and 6 months to personally document how he treats Isabella. When our bet comes to an end, he won't just lose $5 million. He'll lose everything, David added, understanding immediately. The Pierce Foundation, which he uses to clean up his reputation. It will be exposed as a front. His company, a federal investigation for systematic discrimination. His social standing destroyed when the world learns how he really treats his own deaf daughter. David closed the folder carefully. What if he really learns sign language? What if he manages to have that 30-minute conversation with Isabella? Kesha laughed, but there was no humor in that sound. David, you don't understand. This man is incapable of real change. He'll try to find shortcuts, tricks, ways to win the bet without really connecting with Isabella. And every attempt, every moment of arrogance, every display of contempt will be documented. You're playing a very dangerous game, Kesha. No, David. I'm correcting a mistake that should have been corrected long ago. Harrison Pierce has spent decades believing that money and power place him above consequences. It's time someone taught him that certain debts always need to be paid. As she left the cafe that night, Kesha thought of Isabella alone in that cold mansion, believing she was a disappointment to her own father. She thought of all the employees Pierce had humiliated, all the talented young people he had discarded because they didn't fit his narrow vision of excellence. For years, people like Harrison Pierce had thrived because their victims lacked the resources or connections to fight back. But this time would be different. This time he had completely underestimated the wrong person. What Pierce couldn't know, what his arrogance prevented him from realizing, was that Kesha Williams had spent the last 5 years building a network of contacts, evidence, and allies specifically to confront men like him. And now, with direct access to the core of his private life and 6 months to execute her plan, she was about to teach Harrison Pierce a lesson about underestimating people that he would never forget. As she drove back home, a genuine smile finally crossed her lips. Pierce thought he was hiring a sign language teacher. In reality, he had just hired the architect of his own destruction. The date of the final evaluation arrived exactly 6 months later in the same hall of the Metropolitan Hotel. Pierce had insisted on making the event public, inviting journalists and important businessmen. His arrogance blinded him. He was convinced he could beat Kesha and humiliate her publicly. "All right, Mr. Pierce," Kesha announced into the microphone, smiling for the cameras. 30 minutes of conversation in ASL with Isabella. No interpreters. "Are you ready?" Pierce adjusted his jacket with excessive confidence. He had spent the last few weeks memorizing set phrases, convinced he could bluff his way through half an hour. "More than ready. Get ready to work for free." Isabella stood in front of her father, her eyes revealing a mixture of hope and skepticism that broke the hearts of everyone present. The first 5 minutes were painfully awkward. Pierce repeated the same memorized phrases. "How was your day? Are you okay? I love you." Isabella responded with growing frustration, her signs becoming more complex and rapid, clearly testing whether her father really understood anything beyond the basics. 10 minutes in, Pierce began to sweat. Isabella had asked about her art, her dreams for college, her feelings about growing up in silence. He couldn't keep up with anything beyond the simplest words. "Dad?" Isabella signaled slowly, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't even really try, did you? You thought you could fool me like you fool your investors." Pierce tried to respond, but his hands were shaking. The cameras captured every moment of his growing humiliation. 15 minutes in, he exploded. "That's impossible. No one learns a completely new language in 6 months. I learned Portuguese in 4 months when I moved to Brazil to close a $20 million deal," Kesha replied calmly into the microphone. "But of course that was important to you." Isabella apparently is not. It was then that David Chun took the stage carrying a bulky briefcase. "Mr. Pierce," David announced, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Before we discuss your $5 million donation, there are a few other legal matters to resolve." Pierce's face instantly paled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about 17 workplace discrimination lawsuits, all documented by Pierce Innovations employees over the past 5 years. David opened the briefcase, revealing hundreds of pages. Emails where you refer to Black employees as problem resources, recordings of meetings where you suggest that people with disabilities slow down team productivity, testimonials from Latino employees systematically denied promotions. The audience began to murmur, clearly shocked. The cameras Pierce had invited for his victory now documented his downfall. "This is where did you get this information?" Pierce stammered, his confidence completely evaporating. "Jade Williams, a human resources specialist at your company for 5 years," Kesha replied, stepping onto the stage. "And also my sister. Every prejudiced comment, every discriminatory decision, every moment you abused your power has been carefully documented." Isabella recoiled. Shocked to discover the true extent of her father's cruelty, David continued relentlessly. "Furthermore, we have evidence that the Pierce Foundation, your charity, misappropriated funds intended for special education for the Pierce family's personal expenses. This constitutes tax fraud and money laundering." Pierce tried to leave the stage but found federal agents waiting at the exits. "Harrison Pierce," one of them announced, "you are under arrest for systematic workplace discrimination, tax fraud, and misappropriation of charitable funds." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Pierce looked desperately at Isabella, finally understanding that he had lost not only the bet, but everything. "Isabella," he tried to say, but she turned away, walking toward Kesha. "Thank you," Isabella signaled, "for showing me that I deserve more than crumbs of attention from someone who never respected me." The cameras captured Pierce being led away in handcuffs while Kesha remained on stage, serene and victorious. 6 months of carefully orchestrated humiliation had culminated in the complete downfall of one of Chicago's most powerful men. But there was one last surprise that would turn that victory into something much more powerful than simple revenge. 6 months after Harrison Pierce's arrest, Isabella walked across the Harvard campus with a confidence she had never had before. Her first solo art exhibition had sold out at a Boston gallery with critics praising her revolutionary visual language that transcends communication barriers. Pierce, meanwhile, awaited trial under house arrest, his company bankrupt, his foundation dismantled for irregularities. The same journalists who had once fawned over him now documented every step of his spectacular fall. "You really did it," Isabella signaled to Kesha during a video call, smiling radiantly. "We did it," Kesha corrected. "You found your voice. I just showed you that it was always there." The Pierce Foundation was rebuilt under new leadership with Kesha as CEO and Isabella on the board. Hundreds of deaf children now had access to programs that truly saw them as whole people, not charity projects. Jade Williams was promoted to Director of Diversity at a rival tech company, her courage in exposing systematic discrimination making her a respected leader in the industry. Harrison Pierce had learned a devastating lesson. Underestimating people because of their color, disability, or social status isn't just morally wrong. It's a perfect recipe for your own destruction. Isabella would never feel invisible again, and Kesha proved that sometimes justice needs a little help to find its way. True revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's building something greater than they could ever imagine. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove we should never underestimate the power of those who have been underestimated.